Welcome to the Kriya Yoga Podcast, a source of inspiration and actionable education for those inspired towards the goal of enlightenment through yogic meditation. Through these interviews, discussions, and reflections, it is my intention to share the possibility of waking up to the reality of self and God realization, and to remind you of the immortal words of Paramahansa Yogananda. Don't look back. Don't look to the left or to the right. Look straight ahead to the goal and go all the way in this lifetime. I'm Ryan Kurczak, and I'll be your host on this adventure of spiritual self-discovery. Yesterday, I talked about this model of creation, how there's infinite consciousness, eternal infinite spirit, and then we have the more subtle realm, which includes the experience of our dreams, our emotions, our thoughts, our memories, our deepest longings and yearnings, and our capacity to perceive the subtle things. And then we have the physical creation, which is what we all see right now. We all agree that, we can see that harmonium or the camera. And the path of the yogi is to learn to feel from this gross state of consciousness back up through the subtle state until you reach the experience of spirit. When most people learn yoga meditation, and yogic practice, what they're doing is they're learning techniques which harmonize the body and the mind. And that's an excellent first start. Some people, they'll make comments like, Yogananda didn't teach the authentic Kriya Yoga because he didn't get into some of these deeper aspects in his public talks. Well, imagine being an Indian Swami coming over to America in the 1920s and trying to talk about the subtle nature of Purusha and Prakriti. How do you think that would go over? But what could he do? He could teach people, this is how you breathe. This is the technique that you use to circulate life force through the body. Here are the Yoga Sutras. Here's the Bhagavad Gita to begin to plant the seeds of awareness of what is possible. Did Yogananda know the higher procedures? He absolutely did. Did he teach them to students that he had that showed a capacity to grasp these subtler principles? He most certainly did. But he didn't do it on a broad level. He didn't do it on this mass level because the masses couldn't quite grasp it at that time. In fact, at this time, the masses often can't quite grasp it. So what we have to remember is what we learn in yoga and meditation, they are preparations to allow you to go inward, to experience your inner spiritual consciousness. Now, what happens to most people when they start to go inward? Anybody know? They go to sleep. Okay. So our task is first and foremost to learn to do well with sitting upright, with going through the breathing exercises, with learning how to cut ourselves off from external distractions and learn to go within. But our next task is to stay awake once we go in. You'll hear me say sometimes, and I learned this phrase from Vyas Houston of the American Sanskrit Institute, when you go into meditation, I will say things like, relax as if you're relaxing into a dream. Now, most people interpret that as go to sleep. And that's not what I mean. I mean, be upright. Let the body be as relaxed as possible, but flow your awareness within as though you're moving into a dream state. Because in yogic philosophy, our purpose, our goal is to move from the waking state, which is what we consider this to be, to the dream state, which is the subtle state within, into the deep sleep state, which is deeper than even dreams as we know it. And you have to do it consciously, which means you have to do it while you are awake and present. This is why the idea of yoga nidra, again, yoga nidra is often treated in yoga studios as just a glorified way to relax, full body awareness relaxation. And for that purpose, it's really healthy for you and it's really good. But yoga nidra from a yogic perspective is to be able to exist in the states of dream in the same way that you know who you are right now. right? I don't mean to identify with who you are, but I mean, right now, hopefully all of you are awake. It looks like you all are. And you are able to, the presence that you have right now, the idea is to maintain that presence even when dreams start. And so dreams are happening, and then the dream world becomes as real as what you have here, and the you that is here now observing this is there then, and then you get better at it until eventually the dreams go away, and you can't describe it. No one can, but imagine that there's no awareness of anything, but there's just the sense of existence being. And that you that is aware of me talking or aware of what you had for breakfast is as much there in that state as well. So that's what it means when yogis say you're moving from the waking state to the sleep state, to the deep sleep state, and you're doing it consciously. That's what we're aiming to do. What does this have to do with devotion? Well, this takes devotion to want to do this and to actually do it. I was talking with one of my students this morning whose wife is getting her PhD in physics. And he said she's in hermit mode. She's just studying all the time. And I thought about that. So she's studying physics and she's studying all the time. And I wanted to know, what does that mean all the time? Does that mean she spends an hour a day studying physics and the rest of the time she's doing other things? And he said, every waking hour, she is studying for this. And I said, does she take a day off? He said, no. So here we have someone who is studying physics every waking hour, every day. But what do we want to do? Well, I'll meditate for half an hour every day. I'm sure I'll experience God in this lifetime, right? You see the difference? So when we talk about devotion, that is devotion. Right? That is devotion. And I've seen this with everyone who's successful in the things that they do. Another student, a professional violinist in an orchestra, how often does she practice? Hours a day, every day. But what do we want to do with our yoga practice? Well, maybe I'll read a little bit of this book for 15 minutes. That's good. And you put it away. So when it comes to devotion, there are different kinds of devotion. And there is real devotion. And real devotion is essentially being engaged in what is important to you. Now, if I'm telling you, you have to learn to go from the waking state to the deep sleep state, to the dream state, to the deep sleep state, and you get good at meditating and you start to fall asleep and you start taking naps when you're supposed to be meditating, what you need to do then is start working out, how can I stay awake and yet relax? And you have to do what this person who's studying physics is doing. You have to spend the time. Do you have to spend every waking hour doing it? No. But you should at least spend an hour, 45 minutes trying. And so part of devotion isn't simply doing what you're told to do. It's doing what you need to do well, right? Doing what you need to do well. When you read Autobiography of a Yogi and you read those stories about Paramahansa Yogananda and so on, you have to remember from a very young age, he was spending hours a day in meditation, and it wasn't this. You understand what I mean? He had to go within and find ways to live such that he could, first of all, learn the techniques and be able to sit still. And then he had to learn to explore this inner world, these inner realms, because once you start to access the dream state, what happens? All these dreams come up. And what happens when you start dreaming, for most people, you just get lost in them. That's why when you wake up, you remember your dreams and you can report your dreams, but it's not that you're actually in your dream when it's happening and you're saying, oh, I'm dreaming. You know, one of the greatest gifts that's been given to me, which was absolutely terrifying in the beginning, was you've heard me talk about this before over the last few years, but sleep paralysis. And when you have sleep paralysis, your mind wakes up, but your body can't move. And it's terrifying at first because it's as though, things are going on around you and you can't move. And the reason that has been such a gift for me is because every single time it happens, I have learned to maintain the presence of my awareness, to know what's going on, to not freak out, and to just abide in my inner world, my inner space. And when it does happen, I can actually use that time for meditation because I don't have the body troubling me, right? And so what happens if one day death comes, and during that moment, something happens to my body, and I don't have my body to do anything with anymore. Well, because I have all those moments of training in sleep paralysis to recognize, oh, I'm not my body, it will make it much easier for me to remember to stay conscious as a transition happens. And one of the reasons this has been a thing with me, I talked to a neurofeedback expert about this. He said, usually when people meditate well, these kinds of things do start to happen because the meditator is actually learning to navigate these other fields, these other experiences of consciousness. And so even when they fall asleep, this happens to me. When I fall asleep, my body will be snoring. And Jasmine will reach over and touch me, and I feel her touch, and I'm still asleep, and I know to stop snoring. Because even though it seems like my body is asleep, inside, I am still as present as I am right now. And that's taken just years of practice, right? But once that starts to happen, then when you're actually actively meditating, when you're actually sitting up, and the dreams start to come, which for many people are distractions, which make them fall asleep, you can just observe them. Say, okay, and you keep going with your process, and eventually the momentum, the energy of those images flow away, and then all you're left with is a sense of pure awareness, pure being. And then you're able to stay as present with that. And when you stay present with it, again, it's not like taking a nap. You know, how many people do you know that or maybe you see this in meditation groups, when the meditation is over, everybody's got to stretch, and like kind of come back to reality. Well, when you're actually flowing into those states, you don't have to come back to reality. You just shift back to your body and you get up and you do what you're going to do. So there's no readjustment period. And that's really what we're aiming to do, is to live in such a way that the you, the soul, the Purusha, the presence that exists eternally, infinitely, that is one with Ishvara and so on, that you are as aware of that right now as you would be when you go out to lunch, as you would be when you're going to the dentist, as you would be when you're starting to fall asleep, as you would be when you've had a couple beers with your buddies. That same presence is there. And that is yoga practice, really. And in order to do that, it takes devotion. It takes bhakti. And again, when I think about this idea of bhakti, it boils down to, what do you love? What are you interested in? Mr. Davis would share a story about this cartoon. I think he said he saw it in a newspaper, but it had a yogi on a mountaintop, and he was sitting there in his enlightened posture, and someone with a backpack was climbing up the mountain, and he reaches out to the yogi, and the caption says, "I don't want enlightenment, I just want enough to get by," right? And a lot of us approach our spiritual practice in that way. And if you just want enough to get by, just go to the gym every day and be healthy. Go talk to your psychologist so you know how to deal with your relationships and the ever-changing fluctuations in the world, and be a good person. That's all you need to do. If you want to experience enlightenment, if you want to experience freedom within your consciousness, or Kaivalya, you have to learn to navigate these subtle states of experience. And it begins by learning alternate nostril breathing, by learning Kriya Pranayama. It begins by studying the yamas and niyamas that we discussed yesterday, and practicing harmlessness, love, truth, and so on. That's how it begins. But all those things are setting you up to go within, to experience your inner divinity. And in the Yoga Sutras and in Sri Yukteswar's book, The Holy Science, Sri Yukteswar says, the way bhakti happens, in fact, let me just quote it for you here. I marked the page. Okay. When man directs all of his organs of sense, so when we went through that meditation, what did I have you do? I had you engage your capacity to sense things, to feel things. When man directs all his organs of sense towards their common center, the sushumna, the central channel within the spine, this is the door of the internal world. He perceives his God-sent luminous body. What is your God-sent luminous body? It's your body of prana, of life force. Many of us think that if we can see the luminous body, that we'll see someone just glowing, as if they're a light bulb that's shining. And that's good for making physical images to give you a sense of what's going on. But the way you feel that and sense that is through your inner sensation, your ability to feel like the warmth within your body. And that's just a way of accessing it. So you begin to use your feeling of sensation. And then he says, and then you begin to hear a peculiar knocking sound, the pranava shabda, or the word of God. So shabda is sound. Pranava is this universal life force. And in the model of Sankhya philosophy and yoga, remember, it's all about vibration. So nature, Prakriti, Divine Mother, and so on, Purusha, spirit, when there's an interaction amongst these things, a vibration develops. And that can begin as light and begin as sound. It's the subtlest thing that we can experience. It's incomprehensible to us. So don't think that you can put words to it really. You can experience it, but you have to go through the yogic process to get there. But this vibration moves from light and sound until it eventually becomes our capacity to act and perceive. It becomes a mind. And then it eventually becomes the subtle qualities of sound and touch and taste until it eventually becomes the physical stuff that we experience. So it flows downward. And remember, as I said yesterday, what's up here does not require what's down here to exist because it comes from here. In the same way that my father does not require me to exist, but I require my father to exist. You understand that kind of process? So we're learning to feel our way back up through this. And the majority of Sri Yukteswar's holy science is encouraging you to learn to feel deeply into this pranava, into this life force. And the way you start is by feeling the energy of the body. And you do it in such a way that it is non-judgmental. Meaning, if you've got arthritis, if you've got an ache or a pain, that's just being alive. So you just look at it as a sensation that you're feeling, because we're trying, in a sense, go beyond duality here. So we feel it without judgment. And oftentimes that can be very healing in and of itself. Usually, when a person has a problem, whether it's emotional or mental or physical, what makes it worse is the fact that they feel like they've got the problem. Whereas if they just said, I've got an ache or a pain, and they moved on, it wouldn't be as debilitating for them. So that's why you move into this space of observation. And once you begin to feel deeply into the physical sensations of the body, and you begin to feel more subtly into the movement of prana and life force, eventually you begin to hear a sound. And some of you can hear it already, usually in places like this, where a lot of meditation prayers happen. When it gets real quiet, like for example, if the AC went off and we didn't breathe, you could hear a high-pitched sound or a ringing, which many people think they've got tinnitus, but it's that kind of hum or buzz, or even like the sound of crickets. Some people hear it like a sound of crickets, and it's very faint. This is the initial sound of Om as we can perceive it with our conscious awareness. And as Sri Yukteswar says, true bhakti is baptizing ourselves in this experience, because the sound comes from, in a sense, this highest level of manifestation as far as we can perceive it. And every time we direct our awareness up to it, we are purifying ourselves, we're lifting ourselves up into it. And anything that's holding us down, it can't keep holding us down if we want to go up there and experience it, right? Just like if you want to be more successful in life, you can't keep hanging out with your loser buddies, right? Because if you do that, you're just going to keep making the same mistakes that they do. You have to let go of it. And each time you shoot for success, each time you try to improve your life situation, you have to let go of something to move in that direction. Mr. Davis would often say one of the biggest problems that people on the spiritual path have is they don't want to let go of that which no longer serves them. They essentially want to stay who they are and still experience more light in their life. And if there was that light in your life where you were, you wouldn't need to be searching for it, right? So we have to keep this in mind. Now, this takes me to another part of the model of creation in this yogic philosophy. So Om and Prakriti, Divine Mother, this nature of experience, there are three cosmic powers that permeate everything. Three cosmic powers that permeate everything. They're tamas, rajas, and sattva. Now, tamas is the energy of heaviness, inertia, stability. It limits things. It's like boundaries. It's also ignorance and darkness. Rajas is activity, change, transformation, movement, becoming something. Sattva is light and clarity, buoyancy, wisdom. These three things, anything in nature possesses a ratio of these three things. Your mind possesses a ratio of these three things. How can three things make everything? Okay, well, what are the three primary colors? Anyone know what those are? What is it? Yeah, yellow, blue, and red. So if you take those three colors and you give different proportions of all these three colors, they make every color that you can see. There's a lot of colors, right? Eggshell white, barnhouse green. You know, you can just go to a paint shop. There's all kinds of colors. So in the same way that these three different colors can make the infinite number of colors, these three powers create our experience. Now, the yogic process is meant to cultivate sattva, light, buoyancy, clarity, and wisdom. Now, the trouble with how most people see the world and the yogic viewpoint is this. People want to accept everything. They want to say, oh, well, you know, I want to know oneness drinking all night with my buddies. You know, I want to know oneness being engaged in these things which are essentially promote ignorance and darkness and heaviness and inertia. And so they keep trying. And these are the teachers who say, do whatever you want, you know, and it's all one thing anyway, right? And that's a clue that they don't know what they're talking about. Because in the process of yoga, real yoga, you have to cultivate sattva, light. And sattva is part of this spectrum such that when you do something that makes you healthy and free and happy, then you bring more sattva into your life. Your life begins to glow in a way. When you do something that hurts another individual, well, that creates a karma which binds you to this world of experience. That's why we have ahimsa as the very first principle in yoga practice. We need to do whatever it takes to be as harmless as possible. Truth, the word truth is sat, and sat is very much aligned with this principle of sattva, right? We have sattva, and then we have sat, truth. So it tells you that sat is very important in creating a sense of truth, because truth is not just a mental position you have, it's a field of energy, like we talked about yesterday. And the more you engage in truth, the more your life becomes permeated with sattva, with luminosity, with buoyancy. I was reading an interview with this 80-year-old Indian astrologer who is world-renowned. And they asked him, what is the most important thing an astrologer needs to know or do in order to be successful as an astrologer? And he didn't say memorize Brihat Parashar Shastra, or he didn't say, learn how to calculate the Lajatati Avashtas perfectly. He didn't say anything about that. He said, the thing that you need to do to be an excellent astrologer is always tell the truth, right? Why would that be the case? Because he knows that by engaging the energy of truthfulness, you can never lie. Meaning, if you're getting ready to say something and it's not true and you're established in truth, it won't come out of your mouth. And how many of you have gotten ready to tell a lie and you feel that like you know you shouldn't say it, and you feel it's almost like a catch, right? Well, when someone is established in truth, that catch always catches it. Whereas people who aren't always established in truth, they can still get away with letting it come out of their mouth. Okay, so as an astrologer, you probably don't even need to know astrology. But if you practice truth all the time and someone came to you and asked questions, you could respond just by simply contemplating the answer and knowing that the one that came out of your mouth is going to be the truth because you could not speak a lie, right? So sattva brings more light into your life. And when you know truth and you speak truth and you know what truth feels like, and that's really what the whole purpose. Again, as I mentioned yesterday, when we look at the yamas and niyamas, oftentimes people treat them like the 10 Commandments or like a moral imperative, like you have to do it because otherwise, the nun's going to come and smack you with the ruler. It's not like that. The reason they're so important is because it brings more light in your life, which means when you meet a spiritual teacher and you've got that light of truth around you, you are going to know if that teacher is actually speaking the truth, right? You are going to know when you read a book and it's talking about spiritual things, you're going to be able to interpret what that is because you can discern what the meaning really is in that, because truth is a feeling. It's a field. It's not necessarily, a series of aphorisms and so on. Now, going back to devotion. Devotion brings more light into your life. Any kind of devotion brings more light into your life. You don't have to have a guru to be devoted to your guru to experience that devotion. If you are devoted to your spouse and you love your spouse, what happens when you think about your spouse? You immediately feel lighter, clearer, happier, right? When you're devoted to your children, and I mean really devoted to your children, not just trying to turn them into a copy of you, but you want them to thrive and be who they are and support them. Well, what happens? There is a lightness there. There is an openness that comes there. When you're devoted to the study of music, you love it. When you're devoted to something, what do you feel in your heart? You feel love, right? Love, truth, these things go together. And so anytime that you are devoted to something or you love something, you are bringing more light, you are bringing more truth, which brings more discernment and more understanding. So that's why when you study yoga, and you can go off the deep end with Sanskrit and all the fancy words and so on, and that's helpful if you've got a mind for it. But even if you don't have a mind for it, if you just simply love it, if it inspires you, if it brings you, if you know the joy of exploring the process, that brings more love, more light into your life. And then you're happier, clearer, and you experience more truth. It makes it easier for you to hear the Om vibration. It makes it more easier for you to practice harmlessness, non-stealing, contentment, all of this. So devotion is very important, not just to your practice and not just to your guru, your tradition, but devotion to everything and everyone around you. The devotion that I gave and give to Roy Eugene Davis is the same devotion I give to Jasmine, is the same devotion I give to my friends, is the same devotion to give to every activity that I love, because that is what changes you from the inside. We have to remember from the yogic standpoint, we can get all bent out of shape, as we talked about yesterday, about what's going on in the state of the world. Well, what are you filling your mind with when you get bent out of shape about the state of the world? Rajas, the need to transform things. Tamas, inertia, darkness, hatred, anger, tribalism. Because even if you think you're on the right side of things, you still think you're on another side of things. Do you see what I'm saying? You're still creating a sense of tribalism. Now, again, as I mentioned, my counselor had told me one time, she said, you can have compassion for the reason people do things, but you also don't have to allow them to do those things to you. So in the Yoga Sutras, there's a statement that essentially says that the yogi practices joy towards the virtuous compassion to those who are experiencing sorrow, compassion towards those who have sorrow, and neutrality towards the wicked. Neutrality. That means you're just not giving it any energy. Right? You're just not giving it any energy. And in our world, where we want to have a polarity of I am right, you are wrong, any stance like that is perpetuating delusion. And this is why it's very important to just know how the world is.